The general cut her hair as punishment the day she arrived at the remote mountain base, a place where sandstorms swallowed the sun and men walked with their chests wide and their pride wider, and no one expected a woman, especially one with quiet eyes and a low voice, to last even a week, but she stood there unmoving while the sharp steel sliced through her long dark braid, letting the strands fall on the dusty ground as the soldiers snickered and the general smirked, thinking he had broken her spirit when he hadn't even scratched the surface, because she was not who they thought she was, but someone far, far more dangerous, someone who had arrived not by accident, but by mission, someone whose identity was hidden so deeply that only 3 people in the entire military structure knew her real clearance level. And while she whispered to herself for the mission, her mind replayed the oath she had taken years before, an oath that bound her to a program so secret that even the elite refused to speak its code name aloud. She looked at the general, who thought humiliating her hair would humiliate her soul, unaware that he had just disrespected a woman who had trained in the shadows of the Arctic, survived underwater breathing drills that made seals tremble, mastered 19 languages, including dialects soldiers didn't even know existed, and carried scars no ordinary soldier would survive. Yet she stood there calm, letting the hair fall like a snake shedding old skin, because she had long ago learned that anyone who underestimates her gives her an advantage, and she needed every advantage now, because deep inside this base was the man she had been sent to extract, a scientist whose capture would collapse geopolitical stability across 3 continents. So when the general barked orders at her, telling her she would clean the latrines, patrol at night, and stay silent among real soldiers, she only nodded, hiding the fact that every corner of the base had already been mapped in her mind, every guard rotation memorized, every emergency lever cataloged, and every weak point identified, including the general himself, who strutted through the base like a lion unaware of the tranquilizer dart aimed at his back. For she knew things about him, classified things that she would use when the time came. The soldiers around her whispered cruel jokes, calling her the punished girl, the chopped hair rookie, and the nobody assigned to the trash jobs, but none of them knew that she had once commanded a team of ghosts, operatives trained to disappear between heartbeats, that she had infiltrated terrorist compounds disguised as a nurse, a journalist, a mother, and even once a priest, that she had carried comrades on her back across minefields, that she had held dying soldiers in her arms and promised to finish their missions. And so, when she bent down to pick up the scattered pieces of her chopped hair, she was not humiliated, she was measuring the general's knife, memorizing its balance, its angle, the pattern he used to hold it, because instinct told her she might need that knowledge later. As the sun fell behind the mountains and the base lights flickered on, she was sent to guard duty on the outer perimeter, a place soldiers hated because it was lonely, cold, and dangerous. But for her it was perfect, because from there she could hear the convoy patterns, the drone routes, and even the subtle vibration from the underground bunker fans that told her the scientist was still alive. And while she patrolled, the soldiers inside the barracks laughed at her, assuming the silent woman with freshly cut hair was weak, but she was thinking 10 steps ahead, remembering the general's expression. Not pride, not discipline, but fear disguised as arrogance, because she recognized a man hiding something, and she had a feeling what he was hiding was exactly why she had been sent here. The next morning, when she reported for duty, the general insulted her. Again, mocking her appearance, shouting that she looked like a failed recruit, unaware that she had heard far worse in her lifetime, and she kept her composure while the base commander inspected weapons, checked patrol sheets, and scolded soldiers for sloppy discipline. But every time his gaze drifted to her, she saw a flicker, just a flicker, of something uneasy behind his hardened eyes, as if he sensed there was something about her he did not understand, and he hated not understanding days passed like this, with endless chores and silent endurance. And while the soldiers complained about drills, she silently rerouted surveillance cables, memorized keypad codes by listening to the clicks of each number, and slowly earned the curiosity of a few younger soldiers who noticed she never got tired, never got angry, never reacted when insulted, and never made mistakes, even during the hardest tasks. But when anyone asked where she came from, she would only say somewhere far from here. And they assumed she was avoiding her past, unaware that her past was classified to the point that even mentioning it would trigger alarms in a Pentagon server. One night, as she was assigned to accompany a supply run through the canyon, insurgents ambushed the convoy, bullets ripping through the night, and soldiers panicked while she moved with terrifying calm, diving behind crates, calculating angles, and firing exactly 3 shots. Only 3 that silently neutralized the ambushers. And when the dust settled, the stunned soldiers stared at her as if a ghost had taken human form. But she simply said, "We should return," offering no explanation, and rumors spread across the base like wildfire, until they reached the general himself, who demanded she explain how she shot so accurately in total darkness. And she only replied, "Training," which inflamed his temper because he knew that level of precision required black-level operational clearance and a decade of experience, not someone he thought was a recruit. Over the next week, he began secretly reviewing her files, the ones he had been given when she arrived. Files that were suspiciously thin, missing entire sections, entire years, entire operations. And he felt the first real fear creeping into him. The fear that he had punished someone far above his rank, but still he pretended to be dominant, acting crueler and louder, telling soldiers she was a mistake, that she would be transferred soon, unaware that she already knew he was digging, already prepared for the day he discovered the truth, and already planning the moment she would reveal it. Everything changed the night she finally slipped into the bunker, bypassing security lasers with a piece of polished metal, distracting guards using a misrouted signal she created with a broken radio, and entering the restricted hallway where the air smelled like steel and secrets, only to find the scientist shackled, terrified, and whispering, "You came," confirming he had been waiting for her all along. And she said, "We leave tonight." But before she could break his restraints, alarms blared and soldiers swarmed the hallway, forcing her to fight with brutal efficiency, disabling each one without killing them. Because she knew the real enemy was not the soldiers but the general, who appeared at the doorway holding a pistol and wearing an expression so shocked it froze even the air around him. Because in his hand was the report he had pulled from a restricted archive, her real file, stamped with a clearance code so high it outranked even him. And he whispered, trembling, "You're not just a soldier. You're the one they call the Phantom Operative." And she simply stared back, saying nothing, because names meant nothing to her. Only missions mattered. And he stepped back, suddenly remembering the day he cut her hair, realizing he had punished someone who technically outranked him in every sense except formal uniform hierarchy, and guilt washed through him like ice. But she did not waste time on his regret, instead breaking the scientist's chains, ordering the general to step aside, which he did without hesitation now that he understood who she really was. And together she and the scientist escaped through an emergency shaft she had located days earlier, climbing into the freezing night as helicopters lit up the sky. And the general, now fully aware of her identity, ordered the soldiers to stand down, telling them, "Do not fire." She works for command levels beyond anything you can imagine, stunning the entire base. By dawn, she and the scientist were miles away, extracted by a covert aircraft. And as she looked back at the mountains, she touched her short hair and felt no anger, only clarity, knowing hair grows back but dignity does not. And she had carried hers with her all along, untouched by cruelty. Months later, when the truth of her mission spread in whispers across the military, soldiers would remember the woman the general had punished, the woman who had been silent, patient, underestimated, and absolutely unstoppable. And they would say they once served with a living legend. And as she disappeared back into the shadows for her next assignment, and yet even after the world whispered her legend, she did not rest, because her missions were threads woven into a larger web the public would never see. But deep inside, she felt something shift, a weight she had carried for years finally loosening, for the man she rescued had revealed a final truth during their extraction, that the general had not been her enemy, but a man acting under manipulated intelligence feeds sent by traitors who wanted her presence suppressed, traitors who feared what she could uncover. And as the aircraft flew over hostile borders, she realized the punishment she endured. The haircut, the humiliation, the isolation had all been part of a trap meant to keep her identity hidden long enough for the enemy to strike. But instead it became the key that allowed her to move unseen. After returning the scientist to a secure intelligence facility, she disappeared again into deep cover. But the general, plagued by regret, began investigating the corrupted files that misled him, uncovering a conspiracy inside the military. Rogue officers selling classified technology to foreign mercenaries. And when he discovered their plans, they tried to silence him, forcing him to send a coded distress signal to the only person he trusted now. Her, the woman he once punished without knowing she was the highest level operative he had ever met. And when she received the signal, she did not hesitate, returning to the same mountains. Under the cloak of night, moving like a shadow through the base, she once walked as a silent, underestimated nobody. The rogue officers had seized control, the base was in lockdown, and the general was held in the very bunker where she once found the scientist. And as alarms screamed across the compound, soldiers loyal to the traitors panicked, firing blindly. But she moved through them like a storm, silent, precise, unstoppable, using nothing but her fists, a stolen rifle, and the same cold focus. She carried from mission to mission. When she reached the bunker door, she bypassed the security by memory alone, entered, and found the general beaten but alive, who stared at her with disbelief that felt heavier than any words, whispering, "I never apologized." And she simply replied, "You didn't need to. Now move." Because forgiveness was not a luxury she entertained, only completion. And together they escaped through the ventilation shaft, crawling through darkness while gunfire echoed through the metal walls. But once outside, she covered him while he made his way toward the cliffside, where she had pre-planned an extraction rope. And as enemy soldiers closed in, she fought them alone, unleashing every skill she possessed, not as a woman wronged, but as a warrior fulfilling the last thread of a tangled mission. The helicopter arrived in a roar of blades, sending sand flying, and the general climbed aboard, reaching out his hand for her. But she shook her head, stepping back because she knew rogue officers remained inside, and she could not leave loose ends. And as she charged back into the burning base, smoke rising behind her, the general screamed for the pilot to wait, but the helicopter had to lift for safety, and they watched from above as she disappeared into the flames like a ghost returning to the shadows. Inside, she confronted the final traitor, a colonel who had orchestrated the entire conspiracy. And though he aimed his weapon with trembling hands, she moved faster, disarming him in a single motion, ending the threat and triggering the emergency lockdown override that sealed every exit and signaled the end of the rogue command. When she finally emerged hours later, covered in ash, exhausted but unbroken, the sky was tinted with dawn, and the returning loyal forces stared at her with reverence, for she had single-handedly restored control of the base, exposed the traitors, and saved the general who once humiliated her. But she did not stay for praise, slipping away before anyone could approach, leaving only a single message on the command room screen: mission completed. Maintain integrity. The general searched for her for months, wanting to thank her properly, but she was already gone, assigned to operations beyond maps or medals. And while governments argued, rumors spread, and new missions formed, she walked through distant cities as an invisible guardian, carrying secrets nations were built upon. Years later, when the world finally stabilized from the chaos those rogue officers caused, she stood on a quiet cliff overlooking the ocean, feeling the wind in her short hair, understanding that the haircut once meant to shame her had become a symbol of the moment she shed her old identity and stepped fully into the shadows where she truly belonged. And with that final breath of freedom, her long path of battles, secrets, betrayals, and silent victories found its peaceful conclusion. And though no public monument would ever bear her name, her story lived on in whispers, in legends, and on your channel, her brave stories, where her courage continues to inspire. And if you're watching this right now, subscribe for more powerful stories.